today's class we're going to be discussing the Baroque era and the concerted Mass. The most important figure in the Baroque era is a man named Johann Sebastian Bach. You may have heard his name before, but his life is so significant in the Baroque period and in music history that the year that he dies in 1750 marks the close of the Baroque era. Johann Sebastian Bach was a composer, an organist, a harpsichordist, a violinist, whose sacred and secular works for choir, orchestra, and solo instruments drew together the strands of the Baroque period and brought it to its ultimate maturity. He wrote both secular and sacred works. Johann Sebastian Bach has been considered by many musicians as the world's most significant composer of all music history. He is a master of the Baroque techniques, which included his contrapuntal writing, his counterpoint, his harmonic control, the way he was able to lead his listeners down a virtual sonic path on a tour. We'll hear that in a little bit with one of his pieces. The way he organized motivic organization. So motives are the smallest unit of musical phrases. You could think of it as like a motive would be something that would come back again and again, almost like a rhetorical device in speech. And he also integrated the national styles. So he was a German composer, but he studied abroad, so he had mastered the national styles of Italy as well as France. So this man, so significant in the life and history of music. His works included the Brandenburg Concerti, and we'll give you an example of each one of these. In this piece, you'll hear the opening part repeated and it's repeated now by a group of musicians. It's giving you an idea of, in the concerto, it's between various groups, loud, soft, and high. Ensemble. This is seconds. So I just wanted to give you an excerpt of some of these pieces. That was from his one of his Brandenburg Concerti. The next that we'll talk about is the Well-Tempered Clavier. Clavier is like a piano, and some of you may have actually played this. The piece that I'm going to play for you now is from his Prelude Number 1 to the Well-Tempered Clavier. And as you listen to this, this is one of my favorite pieces. I learned it as a kid, as I was studying piano. So that's why I suggest that some of you, if you've studied piano before, you might have played this before. But this is one of his most beautiful pieces for the piano. He starts off in C, and then he moves very gently back home. But here he takes us on a journey. Something interesting down there. And he changes the harmony again. And now it feels like we're in a different world. What is this? Is different. We almost feel as though now we're in a separate space, but he doesn't leave us there for long. You can almost feel the tension building. As he moves through different harmonies. It's a very simple piece if you listen to the notes being played. And now he's going to take us somewhere different. Very unstable. Almost as if you're wondering what's wrong. Such emotion in this very simple piece. And you notice here, as he brings us home, the pattern changes. Back home. Beautiful, beautiful, simple piece, but it's actually so complex. He also wrote a number of different accounts of our Lord's Passion. The first one is the Passion according to St. Matthew, and this is an excerpt from that. From what we studied, we know that that would be a homophonic setting, where you have everyone singing the same words and notes with the same rhythm together in harmony. That was the one of the chorales from the St. Matthew Passion. The St. Matthew Passion, the St. John Passion would all be considered like sacred oratorios. However, those were intended for a church service on Good Friday or Palm Sunday, when the entire service, these passions took quite a long time. And they'd have solos, they'd have chorales like you just listened to, and they would have other works as well, with a narrator who played the role of the evangelist, either St. Matthew or St. John, telling the story of Jesus' death on the cross. The St. John Passion, as you can see, there is another one. Again, this is a chorale. And this would be something that the congregation would sing while listening to it. You know what's significant about Johann Sebastian Bach is that as music students today, when I was in school, we studied Bach's counterpoint, the way he used harmonies and pieces just like that you heard from the St. Matthew Passion, the St. John Passion. We would take those chorales and we would examine them, how he used the harmonic structure to get from one chord to the next. How did he compose? Students today still study Johann Sebastian Bach because he was such a master at this. This is why his music is so significant in the history of the world. He also wrote the Magnificat, and then he wrote a number of organ pieces as well. But before I get to the Art of the Fugue, just so you know, he wrote over 200 surviving cantatas and a similar number of organ works, which included the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And as we get closer to Halloween, you'll probably have heard this piece played. It's one of his most popular organ works. This is the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. I think this section here was used in The Exorcist, if I recall correctly. And when you go on your field studies, you may notice, and if they list the preludes, that oftentimes you would hear organists playing some work by Johann Sebastian Bach. It's very common that you would hear that in today's churches. So now let's talk about one of his most significant works, the Mass in B minor. And it's one of the reasons we are studying Johann Sebastian Bach. His works, as of most all really significant composers, have been cataloged, and this would be called his work number 232, so BWV 232. It was assembled in 1749, just a year before he died. However, this piece that we're going to be studying, the Sanctus, was composed earlier in 1724. Bach was a Lutheran, as most of Germany and obviously not most of Germany, but certain parts of Germany, German-speaking countries, were Lutheran. Other parts remained Catholic. But Bach worked in Leipzig, and he was a Lutheran, and so most of his compositions were for the Lutheran Church. However, it's interesting that the Mass in B minor, which was never intended to be performed in an actual Mass, the Mass in B minor is in the Latin, even though many of the Lutheran churches would have used vernacular in their services, but his Mass in B minor is in Latin. The Kyrie and the Gloria were composed in 1733. So the reason why it says assembled there in 1749 is because he kind of puts things together. And as you can, if you haven't already watched the video with Helmut Rilling, he talks about how he integrated the Sanctus that had been written 25 years before into his composition. The parts of the Mass, he didn't really give his Mass a title. Instead, in the score, 4 parts of the Latin Mass are each given their own title page. So there's four parts, which is a little different from what we had before. So there is the Kyrie, as we would expect. There's the Gloria, and the Credo, which he titles the Symbolum Nicenum, which just means the Nicene Creed, essentially. And then the final movement includes both the Sanctus and the Agnus Dei, with these other two sections. So within the Sanctus, we would consider the Hosanna and Benedictus. That would all be one work, and then the Agnus Dei. But he incorporates that into that that final fourth movement. The whole piece itself is nearly 2 hours long, and because it was of its length, it was never performed in its entirety as a part of a church liturgy, but sections have been used for that. The Mass in B minor is widely regarded as one of the supreme achievements of classical music. Alberto Basso summarizes the work as follows: "The Mass in B minor is the consecration of a whole life. Started in 1733 for diplomatic reasons, it was finished in the very last years of Bach's life, when he was already gone blind. This monumental work is a synthesis of every stylistic and technical contribution that Bach made to music. But it is also the most outstanding spiritual encounter between the worlds of the Catholic glorification of the cross, Catholic glorification and the Lutheran cult of the cross." So this beautiful combination of those two divergent theologies. So let's talk about the historical significance of this piece. Bach's B minor Mass continues to provide a transformative musical and spiritual experience. In 1818, the Swiss publisher Hans-Georg Nägeli proclaimed it the greatest musical artwork of all times and all people. Now, in 1818, maybe that's true. I think maybe it's true, but if you think about that, the greatest musical artwork of all times and all people. You think about the significance of that. What other great piece of music is there? One might consider some operas, maybe by Mozart or Handel. But this piece he considered to be the greatest musical artwork of all time and all people. Of all people, so not just the Europeans, who certainly had elevated the level of music around the world because of the invention of counterpoint. I think it's a significant moment to stop and realize that what we're talking about here, I think even to today, could be considered one of the greatest musical artworks. Possibly the Ninth Symphony by Beethoven could surpass it. But in 1818, when Nägeli said this, that hadn't been written. Someone else said, amidst the angst of more recent times, it was composer Michael Torke, he said, "Why waste money on psychotherapy when you can listen to the B minor Mass?" I think that is really also quite interesting to think of that, the historic significance of that statement. Why waste money on psychotherapy when you can listen to the B minor Mass? It has that kind of transformative experience in listening to it. And I hope that as you listen to Helmut Rilling in the lecture series that he gives with the whole orchestra and the choir there, as he breaks it apart to reveal Bach's compositional techniques, then you need to go back and listen to the entire work with your eyes closed. Just listen to, not the entire work, but just the Sanctus. Listen to it and allow yourself to really take that in and experience it. and maybe you'll feel the same way. Now, for the Sanctus in particular, the first part, as I said earlier, was written in 1724. It's written for a six-part chorus with soprano 1 and 2, alto 1 and 2, and tenor and bass. It's in D major, the Sanctus is, and is marked largo, which means slow. It's common time, so it's 4/4. And in other sections, we get a vivace section in 3/8 time. It is derived from an earlier, now lost work that was written in 1724, as we talked about. But we have this surviving. Some of the images that he creates in this, the sopranos in the opening part of it, you hear them singing this very long melisma with these triplets. Sa, and it's like the angels hovering around God's throne. It's really quite interesting. And then you hear this dialogue, um, of angels shouting back and forth. You'll hear in the video with Helmut Rilling, you'll hear that chromatic descending line by the men, and in the tenors you hear the pleni sunt celli et terra, the vivace 3/8 section that I mentioned earlier. So now go listen, watch the video, listen to the music, and I think you'll be astounded by it.